A police officer slapped a black woman in the middle of the street, thinking he was putting a stranger in her place. But what he didn't know, that woman was Jasmine Crockett, and she was anything but ordinary. What he thought was a warning slap became the mistake that cost him everything. Jasmine didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She simply stood tall, and the entire system began to shake. If justice can be struck down in public, what happens when it rises? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. 6:30 a.m., Fairfax, Virginia. The morning unfolded like a painting, air cool and thin, the sun casting a soft gold hue across perfectly trimmed lawns and ivy-wrapped gates. It was the kind of neighborhood that stayed silent on purpose, where the sound of joggers' sneakers were the only acceptable rhythm on the sidewalk. It was here, against this curated backdrop of wealth and whiteness, that Jasmine Crockett ran, unapologetically, powerfully. Her strides were steady, her breath paced, her mind focused. She wore no flashy gear, no designer logos, just a fitted black windbreaker, leggings, and a worn pair of Asics. From a distance, she was ordinary. To anyone else, she might be invisible. But to Officer Thomas Granger, she wasn't just a runner. She was an anomaly. Granger had seen her seconds after she turned the corner. He was parked under the shade of a maple tree, halfway through his third cup of black coffee and halfway through a crossword puzzle he never finished. His eyes flicked up. A black woman, alone. In this neighborhood? He stiffened instinctively, scanning the street with a veteran's intensity. He didn't recognize her. That was all it took. His thumb hovered over the switch. No sirens, just lights, just a signal, not for backup, but for dominance. In his mind, there were two types of people here, residents and intruders, and right now she wasn't the first. Jasmine felt the shift before she saw it, the slight hum of an engine pulling closer, the red and blue lights reflecting faintly off the pavement in the corner of her eye. She stopped, one earbud out, calm, collected. She turned to face the cruiser with a stillness that spoke volumes. Officer Granger stepped out with the kind of gait honed over decades, slow, deliberate, and designed to make people shrink. "Morning," she said, voice steady. He didn't return the greeting. "ID," he demanded. No explanation. No probable cause. Just a man who expected compliance. Jasmine blinked once, unmoved. "I'm out for a run. Why do you need my ID?" The temperature dropped. A slow tension thickened the air. Granger narrowed his eyes, the lines around his mouth deepening. "We've had reports. You match the description of someone suspicious." Jasmine's reply came without pause. "Define suspicious?" She wasn't being coy. She wanted to hear him say it. His silence said enough. He stepped closer, his boots heavy against the pavement. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Jasmine raised her chin, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Am I being detained, officer?" That question, those 5 words, were like gasoline on a flame. A jogger across the street slowed. A curtain shifted in a nearby window. A woman on a porch stopped sipping her coffee. The world around them began to tilt. Granger's patience snapped like brittle glass. "Give me your goddamn ID," he barked, now red-faced. Jasmine didn't flinch. "Unless I'm suspected of a crime, I'm not required to..." And then came the slap. Not a push, not a grab. A full, open-handed, unprovoked slap across her face. The sound wasn't just loud. It was surgical, like a whip cracking through fabric. It cut the air in two. Time stopped. The street went silent. Even the birds went still. Jasmine's head snapped to the side from the impact. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hair shifted with the force of it. Her cheeks stung raw and red. But she didn't fall. She didn't stagger. She froze in place, stone still, spine straight, eyes wide, processing not just the pain, but the audacity of it. And then slowly, like a storm returning to sea, she turned her head back to face him. What Granger saw in her eyes in that moment was not fear, not even rage. What he saw was certainty, a calm, terrifying, unshakable certainty that this moment would not end here. "You just ended your career," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped low, almost intimate, like a verdict being whispered by a judge. And you don't even know it yet. Granger froze, hand half raised like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. But now eyes were watching, many, dozens, phones lifted, cameras rolling, witnesses everywhere. Someone across the street muttered, "I got that. A jogger sudagot, han har netop truffet henne. Did you see that?" The woman on the porch had tears in her eyes. Granger panicked. He lunged, grabbed Jasmine's wrist, twisted it behind her back and forced on the handcuffs, not to restore control, but to hide his own crumbling authority. "You're under arrest," he spat. "For what?" she asked again. His answer was a stammer. "Interference. Resisting." "You just assaulted me," she said flatly, "and you're trying to bury it with a lie." Her voice didn't shake. Her body didn't tremble. But the bruise blooming across her cheek told the story loud enough for everyone else. As Granger shoved her into the back of the cruiser, her words echoed one last time. "You have no idea who I am, but you will." The door shut with a solid metallic thunk, followed by the unmistakable click of the automatic lock, a sharp punctuation mark on the chaos that had just occurred outside. Inside the cruiser, it was a different world. The back seat was a narrow plastic bench, molded for control, not comfort. Jasmine sat stiff-backed, her arms locked behind her, the handcuffs biting into her wrists. She didn't shift. She didn't blink. Her cheeks still burned from the slap, but she didn't raise her head to the mirror. She simply looked out the window like she was staring through time itself. The stillness in her posture wasn't numbness. It was containment, like a dam holding back an ocean. Up front, Officer Thomas Granger adjusted his rearview mirror, glancing back at her just long enough to remind himself that he was still in control. She hadn't said a word since being shoved in. To him, that silence meant victory. He saw what he wanted to see: compliance. A subdued, arrogant woman who finally realized she'd crossed a line. But beneath that assumption, something gnawed at him. Her calm wasn't normal. There was no panic, no protest, no pleading. None of the fear he was used to seeing in people cuffed in the back of his car. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. The rhythmic tap, tap, tap was the only sound besides the low hum of the engine. He needed the noise, something to fill the silence Jasmine had left behind. For a man like Granger, silence was dangerous. It let doubt creep in. And he couldn't afford doubt, not after what had just happened in full view of a growing crowd and more than a few raised smartphones. He told himself he had handled it. She had resisted. She had attitude. He had reason. It was all by the book. Or at least, close enough. But her stillness continued to press on him, like the pressure drop before a storm. He checked the mirror again. She wasn't even looking at him. That should have made him feel powerful. Instead, it made him feel irrelevant. And that infuriated him. He cleared his throat, more forcefully than necessary. "You got nothing to say now, huh?" he muttered loud enough for her to hear. No reply. He stared straight ahead, knuckles white on the wheel. Typical. Loud when you think you're right. Quiet when you're cuffed. Still nothing. Then finally, her voice, low and even, cut through the cruiser like a scalpel. "You might want to run my name before you make another mistake." Granger blinked. He turned his head halfway toward the back seat, confused by the suddenness and the tone. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't desperation. It was something worse. Certainty. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't change her tone. "I said, check my name." She leaned her head slightly, just enough to make eye contact through the mirror. "Or better yet, check your assumptions." Granger felt a flicker in his stomach, a faint cold twist that registered before his mind could rationalize it. Something in her expression told him this wasn't going to end the way he thought. Her eyes weren't scared. They weren't even angry. They were prepared. He forced a scoff. "Oh, you one of those, huh? Think a fancy job title's going to get you out of this?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was the answer. He reached for the onboard laptop mounted to the dash. The screen flickered to life, waiting for input. He hesitated, hand hovering over the keyboard. Some part of him, The small, rusted voice of reason buried under years of bravado whispered, "What if she's not bluffing?" But his pride was louder. He pulled his hand back. "Save it," he snapped. "You'll have your chance to talk at the station." Backseat silence again. But this time Granger couldn't shake the feeling that he was the one being watched, that she wasn't the one on trial. He was. Jasmine's gaze shifted out the window again, but her mind was miles ahead. She wasn't thinking about the cuffs. She was already playing the next 4 moves. She was already picturing the faces at the precinct when her identity came to light. She was already preparing for the fallout. She wasn't just a policy advisor. She was the senior legal strategist on executive accountability, reporting directly to the president. Her job was to keep people like Granger in check. And now he had slapped her. In public, on camera, with witnesses. And he didn't even know her name. That ignorance would cost him everything. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She wasn't here for revenge. But she would not allow this to slide. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about every woman who had ever been silenced. Every professional who had ever been mistaken for a threat simply for existing in the wrong place, in the wrong skin, at the wrong time. The cruiser turned onto Commonwealth Avenue. The police station was just ahead, and Jasmine Crockett sat straight, unmoving, as if walking calmly through a courtroom in her mind. A reckoning was coming, and Granger was still under the illusion that he was in control. But control, she knew, was never about who held the cuffs. It was about who knew how to break them. The cruiser rolled into the parking lot of the Fairfax Police Department, tires crunching over gravel as the sun climbed higher in the pale morning sky. From the outside, the building looked quiet, just another routine day unfolding. But inside that patrol car, silence pulsed like a bomb waiting to go off. Jasmine Crockett sat motionless, her wrists still cuffed tightly behind her back. The soreness in her shoulders was growing, and the red mark on her cheek from the slap throbbed with every heartbeat. But she held her composure like armor. Her breath was steady, her eyes focused. She wasn't thinking about revenge. She was cataloging everything. Granger slammed the cruiser door shut and yanked her out, gripping her by the arm harder than necessary. He strutted toward the building like a soldier returning with a prize. His chest puffed, his voice loud before the door even opened. "Got ourselves a real one this morning, folks," he announced, dragging Jasmine past the front desk. "Miss, I know the law better than the cops right here. Thought she didn't have to cooperate." His tone was cruel, performative, designed to humiliate. Several officers looked up from paperwork, pausing mid-conversation. One of them raised an eyebrow. Another smirked awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh or stay out of it. "She fought me," Granger said, louder this time. "Tried to challenge me out there. Started quoting laws like she was some kind of hotshot attorney. Wouldn't even show me ID. You believe that?" He shook his head and clicked his tongue. "But don't worry, I set her straight." He turned to Jasmine and added with a sneer, "Didn't I?" Then, without waiting for a response, he kept going. "You want to play games in my town, sweetheart? You're in the wrong place for that. This isn't D.C. We don't play soft here." He pushed her forward again, this time rougher. Jasmine stumbled slightly but caught herself, still silent, still steady. Her silence only made him angrier. He wanted a reaction, needed one. "What, no more clever comments?" he mocked. "Where's that big attitude now? You had plenty to say before." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping into a low growl. "Let me guess. You're one of those types. Think just 'cause you've got a few degrees and a fancy tone of voice, you're above the law." Jasmine didn't answer. She looked past him, straight ahead, chin raised as if refusing to grant him the dignity of her attention. That infuriated him. He stepped in front of her, forcing her to stop. "Say it," he barked. "Say you were wrong. Say you shouldn't have resisted. Say you deserve to be arrested." His eyes gleamed with something dark, something unhinged. "Or are you too proud to admit when you lose?" The room had gone almost completely silent now. The officers behind the desk weren't smirking anymore. They were watching, listening. Something in the air had changed. A tension had crept in, the kind that warned something was about to go terribly wrong. Jasmine turned her head slowly and met his eyes. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, precise, lethal. "You have no idea what you've done." Granger rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, save the drama. You're nobody. Just another arrogant civilian who thought she could mouth off to a cop." Jasmine tilted her head slightly, her face unreadable. "Is that what you think I am?" He scoffed. "Number, I know what you are." That was when she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she shifted her cuffed hands behind her back and pulled from the waistband of her jacket a small black leather wallet. She held it up in front of her, eyes never leaving his. He froze. The room froze. The wallet flipped open, and a golden federal badge caught the fluorescent light like a flash of lightning. Below it, in bold, unmistakable letters, United States Executive Office. National Security Clearance, Level 5. Jasmine L. Crockett, Senior Legal Advisor to the President. White House Counsel's Office. No one spoke, not even a breath. The silence was absolute. Jasmine stepped forward, cuffed hands still holding the badge out. Her voice was ice. "I am a senior advisor to the President of the United States. I have direct jurisdiction over federal law enforcement ethics policy. And you," she looked straight at Granger, "just committed assault, unlawful arrest, and public misconduct on a federal official. On camera, in front of witnesses." One of the officers at the desk dropped his pen. Another backed away instinctively. Sergeant Dawson, ranking officer on duty, stood up so fast his chair skidded back and slammed into the wall. "Granger," Dawson said, eyes wide, voice low. "Take the cuffs off, now." Granger stood frozen, his face pale. "She didn't say who she was," he mumbled. "She didn't have to," Dawson snapped. "You just manhandled a White House official, you idiot." Still, Granger didn't move. So Dawson stormed over, grabbed the cuff key himself, and with 2 sharp clicks, unlocked the restraints. Jasmine rolled her wrists gently, not flinching. The red marks stood out against her skin like warnings carved in flesh. She didn't massage them, she let them show. Then came the sound that changed everything, the ring of the direct line. A special phone behind the desk, never used, barely noticed, but now it screamed for attention. Dawson answered. "Fairfax PD, this is Sergeant Dawson." He listened for only a few seconds, his face drained of color. "Yes, sir. Yes, she's here. Understood. I'll deliver it personally." He hung up. His voice shook as he turned back to the room. "That was the Office of Presidential Coordination. We've been ordered to immediately release Ms. Crockett, begin an internal review, and place Officer Granger on indefinite suspension pending federal investigation." A long pause, then, "Washington is watching. This incident is already under review at the highest level." Granger's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Jasmine didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. The power had already shifted. The room now belonged to her, and the man who thought he could use fear to command respect had just been publicly destroyed by a woman who never had to raise her voice to be heard. The silence in the precinct hadn't even settled before the first video hit Twitter. It was short, just 23 seconds. A phone camera catching the moment Officer Granger raised his hand and slapped Jasmine Crockett in broad daylight. There was no context needed. The sound of the impact, the way her head snapped to the side, the cuffs being slapped on, her words calm, chilling, unforgettable. "You just ended your career." It spread like wildfire. Within 15 minutes, the clip had already been retweeted 5,000 times. By the end of the first hour, it had exploded onto Instagram, Facebook, Reddit. Hashtags started appearing. "Justice for Jasmine," "Hands off her," "White House assault." By the time Granger handed in his badge, the world had already seen what he'd done. News anchors interrupted regular programming to cover the developing story. Breaking: Senior White House advisor assaulted during unlawful arrest by local officer. The headlines were everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, even international outlets. Officer Thomas Granger seen striking federal official in viral video. Fairfax PD under federal scrutiny after assault on White House staffer. And most devastating of all, a slap that shook the system. The moment had become symbolic. It wasn't just about one woman anymore. It was about every unspoken injustice carried by millions. Jasmine Crockett had become a name etched into the public conscience overnight. Politicians from both sides of the aisle released statements within hours. Civil rights groups held emergency press conferences. Congresswomen and senators condemned the act as a blatant display of racial profiling, gender-based power abuse, and unlawful force. The president himself, without naming names, tweeted, "We stand by every member of our team, especially those who serve with honor, integrity, and courage. No one is above the law." And though the message was measured, everyone knew exactly who it was about. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just defended, she was claimed. At the Fairfax Police Department, the walls were closing in. Granger was officially suspended before the end of the day. His superiors issued a statement calling the incident deeply troubling, citing gross misconduct and violation of protocol. But it wasn't enough. The public wanted blood. Protesters gathered outside the precinct by sundown, chanting Jasmine's name, holding signs that read, "She could have been me," and "A badge is not a weapon." The video now had over 20 million views and climbing. Civil rights attorneys filed motions for investigation. Demands for systemic change flooded City Hall. Meanwhile, Granger's face was everywhere. Blown up on TV screens, frozen mid-slap, his eyes wide with rage, his hand raised, a still image now burned into national shame. His name trended on Twitter for 36 straight hours. Reddit threads dissected every inch of the footage. YouTubers made breakdown videos. TikTok teens added dramatic music and text overlays. He messed with the wrong woman. Even his LinkedIn profile was discovered and spammed with comments like, "Hope the badge was worth it," and "Your career aged like milk." There was no escaping it. Old friends stopped calling. Former colleagues avoided his texts. The group chats he'd once led with off-color jokes went dark. His family refused to speak to him. His father, a retired officer himself, sent a single text, "You dishonored the uniform." His wife stayed silent. His teenage daughter deleted her social media. A neighbor posted a photo of his house with the caption, "This is where Officer Thomas Granger lives. Let's make sure the whole world remembers." By nightfall, his world had crumbled. Inside his home, Granger paced like a man stranded in a burning room. The TV blared his name. Commentators speculated on prison time. Civil rights attorneys were calling it a landmark case. He watched the footage over and over again. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he couldn't comprehend how fast it had all fallen apart. In less than 12 hours, he had gone from respected officer to symbol of systemic rot. And what haunted him most wasn't the slap. It was the moment after. Her face, the way she looked at him. That calm, razor-sharp look of someone who knew exactly how this would end. The injustice Jasmine had faced was now center stage. Talk shows invited Black women lawyers, politicians, and professors to speak on the deeper implications. "This isn't new," one analyst said. "What's new is that it happened to someone the system can't ignore." Protesters quoted her words. Artists painted murals. College students wrote op-eds. Across every corner of the country, the name Jasmine Crockett became a rallying cry. Not just for justice, but for exposure, for accountability, for change. She was the face of a reckoning the system could no longer dodge. And yet, amid all of it, Jasmine herself remained silent. No social posts, no interviews, no dramatic statements. She didn't need to speak. The country was speaking for her. Her silence wasn't retreat. It was strategy, a pause before the next move. Because Jasmine wasn't just a symbol, she was a strategist. And she understood that when the system hurts you, you don't just survive, you restructure it. She was preparing her response, not just to Granger, but to the entire institution that had allowed this to happen. Meanwhile, Granger, alone in his house, blinds closed, phone buzzing with hate, had nothing left but the echo of his own choices. His voice, once loud and commanding, meant nothing now. He opened his laptop in desperation, typing out a statement, but there was nothing he could write that would change the truth. No words could outpace the footage. No apology could reverse the slap. He didn't lose his job that morning. He lost his mask, and the world had finally seen what was underneath. While Jasmine quietly built her case in the light, far from the cameras, Darkness found a new home in a forgotten corner of Fairfax. And in that shadow, Thomas Granger began to unravel. The blinds were always closed now. Empty liquor bottles clinked on the floor like discarded shells. The apartment smelled of sweat, stale beer, and defeat. Granger hadn't shaved in days. He barely ate. He didn't sleep much either. His nights were consumed by endless reruns of the viral footage. He'd press play again and again, pausing on that one frame, his hand raised mid-strike, her face still, the crowd watching. The moment he lost everything. And in his mind, the villain was never him. It was her, Jasmine, her confidence, her calm, her silence. She ruined me, he whispered into his whiskey. Not the system, her. The rage didn't simmer. It boiled. Alone and disgraced, Granger had no job, no allies, no future. But he still had his bitterness. And bitterness, when left unchecked, becomes an invitation for darkness to knock. It came in the form of a letter, unmarked, unsigned. A single sentence typed on crisp white paper. You're not a failure. You're a soldier betrayed by a coward system. He found the second envelope days later, taped to his door. This time inside was a burner phone and an address. No name, just coordinates. And for a man with nothing left to lose, curiosity was the last drug he needed. Granger followed it. They met him in a warehouse. No logos, no banners, no flags. Just men in black coats, faces half lit, voices calm. Not angry, not loud, persuasive. They didn't talk about race. They didn't talk about politics. They talked about order, control, power. One of them leaned forward, voice like a sermon. You didn't attack the system attacked you for trying to protect it. And her? She's not justice. She's the rot beneath the surface, pretending to be clean. Granger didn't speak, but his silence said yes. They gave him a new purpose, not to reclaim his name, but to erase hers. Not with bullets, with whispers. Within days it began, a smear campaign designed with surgical precision. Fabricated financial documents appeared on obscure message boards, claiming Jasmine had accepted bribes during her time as a federal investigator. Screenshots of fake emails circulated on Reddit and Telegram channels, alleging she had buried evidence to protect corrupt officials. Twitter bots pushed hashtags like #CROCKETTCOVERUP and #CORRUPTJASMINE. TikTok influencers with no real knowledge began asking the same question. Why isn't anyone talking about her past? One post claimed she once worked with a disbarred lobbyist. Another accused her of hiding assets in the Cayman Islands. None of it could be verified, but that didn't matter. In the age of outrage, accusation was ammunition. The news cycle turned. Cable panels, once supportive, began asking questions. Is Jasmine Crockett hiding something? Was her rise too fast? Did she make enemies in Washington? Reporters chased her through Capitol corridors. Microphones were shoved in her face. Did you take the money? Are you being investigated? Do you plan to step down? She said nothing, because silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. But the pressure was real. Allies grew nervous. A senator quietly withdrew support from a bill she authored. A major network delayed airing an interview with her. The whispers were working, not because they were true, but because they were loud. Behind the curtain, Granger watched the chaos unfold like a man watching fireworks. He didn't care if the lies held up. He just needed them to stick long enough to stain her. Let her drown in doubt, he mumbled, scrolling through hate-filled comment sections. Let them see she's no hero, just another politician with a mask. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jasmine Crockett was not standing still. She was tracking every move, every fake file, every burner account, every dollar spent. Because while the world focused on the storm, Jasmine was already following the lightning back to the hand that struck the match. In the basement level of a secure DC office building, with no nameplate and no public record, Jasmine sat at the head of a long steel table surrounded by people she trusted with more than her life. She trusted them with the truth. There was no press here, no cameras, just data analysts, cybersecurity specialists, and 2 retired federal prosecutors who owed her favors they'd never speak of. Jasmine had worked with every one of them before. These weren't politicians. These were problem solvers. They didn't ask her how she was feeling. They asked her, "Where do we start?" Jasmine tapped the digital whiteboard and began with the only trail that never lies: money. "Follow the transfers," she said, voice sharp, eyes locked on the cluster of bank statements already mapped on the board. "I don't care who's on TV. I want to know who's wiring money from where." Her years as a legal strategist had taught her that the law was a machine, slow, rigid, and clunky. But beneath it, there was always a current, and that current was always financial. The deeper they dug, the more patterns emerged. Payments routed through shell nonprofits. An independent news site founded just months ago receiving hundreds of thousands in anonymous donations. A PAC registered in Delaware sending monthly transfers to a boutique PR firm that had never filed a single invoice. The fake stories, the viral clips, the coordinated hashtags, all traceable back to a single digital fingerprint. And that's when the breakthrough came. Buried beneath layers of obfuscation and false leads, they found a name Jasmine hadn't heard in years, but had never forgotten: Dominion Shield, a shadow organization she had helped investigate half a decade earlier. They disguised themselves as a think tank for national security, but Jasmine's 12-month probe had uncovered internal corruption, violent rhetoric, and illegal surveillance of government officials. The investigation ended in multiple shutdowns and quiet arrests, but not total destruction. Now they were back, and this time they were targeting her. Worse still, the data revealed something that made Jasmine's blood run cold. One of the organization's current operatives, listed under an alias but confirmed through facial ID metadata, was none other than Thomas Granger. He hadn't just joined them recently. He had been with them all along. For 3 days, Jasmine didn't sleep. She barely spoke. She pored over every detail, cross-checking it herself before even considering it ready for federal escalation. When the team confirmed its final node, a direct connection between Dominion Shield and 5 well-known political donors funding disinformation pipelines, she knew it was time to move, and she did it her way. The press conference was announced only 20 minutes before it began. No networks were tipped off in advance. But the moment Jasmine stepped up to the podium in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, flanked not by security, but by her research team, the world stopped to listen. Her voice was calm, focused. Her eyes scanned the sea of press and flashbulbs and microphones, and then she spoke, slowly and deliberately. "I have not responded until now, because I wanted to speak with facts, not fear. What's happening here is not about my name. It's not about my reputation. And it's certainly not about my ego. It's about the very foundation of our legal system and the slow, intentional rot trying to tear it apart from the inside. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to expose the machine that tried to silence me." She tapped the tablet in her hand, and the screens behind her lit up with a timeline. False wire transfers, forged media accounts, coordinated publishing schedules. The press room gasped. The data didn't lie. The campaign against me was funded by a group operating under the name Dominion Shield, a group I investigated 5 years ago and helped dismantle. That group never disappeared. They just adapted. And now they're back, not just targeting me, but targeting the justice system we all rely on to keep order from becoming tyranny. Her voice hardened. "I will not allow fear-mongering, conspiracy, or propaganda to define the truth. Not on my watch, not in my country." Within 24 hours, federal warrants were executed. The Justice Department moved fast, faster than anyone expected. Dominion Shield's headquarters was raided in the early hours of the morning under federal surveillance for weeks thanks to Jasmine's quiet tip-off. 5 high-ranking members were arrested before breakfast. 2 tried to flee but were intercepted on the tarmac of a private airstrip in West Virginia. Servers were seized, accounts frozen. Dominion Shield had fallen. The conspiracies were exposed. Granger's face was no longer on news channels. It was on federal watch lists. And as Jasmine stood stronger than ever in the public eye, the man who had once worn a badge now carried only hatred. And hatred doesn't go quietly. It was 2:37 a.m. The streets of Northwest Washington were silent, slick with the sheen of recent rain. Streetlights flickered across driveways and hedges in Jasmine Crockett's neighborhood, where quiet wealth and quiet power slept behind thick glass and locked doors. But this night, silence was not safety. Inside an old, unregistered Dodge parked 2 blocks from Jasmine's home, Thomas Granger sat with a pistol in his lap. His eyes were bloodshot, jaw clenched so tight it trembled. 3 others were with him, men drawn in from the ashes of Dominion's shield, ex-cops, ex-military, all with one thing in common. They blamed Jasmine Crockett for their downfall. "Are we doing this or not?" one of them hissed. Granger didn't speak. He just nodded once. They moved quickly, like they'd rehearsed it in the shadows. Black clothes, gloves, masks. One carried bolt cutters. Another had a duffel bag heavy with weapons. Granger had brought the plan. The rest brought the rage. The goal was simple: in and out. Kill the woman who humiliated him, who brought down everything they built. Leave no trace. But they hadn't planned for her to be ready. Jasmine had been reviewing court prep files when the security alert buzzed on her phone. System override detected perimeter breach. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She stood. In the weeks following the smear campaign, Jasmine had moved her home security into federal oversight. Her house was now part of an FBI-protected asset zone. What Granger didn't know, what he could never know, was that the FBI had been tracking him for 6 weeks straight. In this moment, this was the trap. As the group advanced through Jasmine's backyard, a low-infrared sensor tracked every footstep. The cameras were silent, invisible, but watching. FBI agents were already in position. One unit hidden in a van down the street, another embedded inside Jasmine's garage behind a false wall. Granger and his men slipped through the back entrance. The kitchen was dark, too dark. They moved slowly, weapons drawn, scanning corners, whispering commands. Granger's heart pounded louder than the rain tapping against the windows. They reached the hallway leading toward the master bedroom, and then the lights exploded on. Blinding white filled the house. From every direction, FBI, drop your weapons, hands on your head. It was chaos, screaming, shouting, footsteps crashing against hardwood. One man tried to run, was tackled into the marble island. Another froze, arms up, sobbing. The third reached for his weapon, too slow. And Granger? He didn't resist. He dropped to his knees. Jasmine appeared moments later, escorted by 2 agents. She wore a bulletproof vest under her robe, but her face was bare, calm, focused. She walked slowly through the living room, now filled with federal officers and floodlights. When she stood in front of Granger, he looked up, squinting under the weight of his humiliation. His mouth opened, maybe to curse her, maybe to plead. She didn't give him the chance. Her voice was ice. You had power, you had trust, and you used both to destroy everything around you, including yourself. He said nothing. Now look at you. You're not a cop. You're not a patriot. You're a failed assassin in zip ties on my kitchen floor. He looked away, face twitching. The agents began dragging him to his feet. You never understood power, she added, voice lower now, meant only for him. Real power doesn't scream. It endures. And with that, she turned away, never looking back. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights lit up the quiet street like a war zone. Neighbors peeked from windows, phones in hand, jaws dropped. By dawn, the footage was everywhere. Former officer Thomas Granger arrested in an attempted political assassination. Headlines blazed, "Failed cop turns terrorist in midnight raid on federal official." From badge to criminal, Granger's final fall. But none of them captured what Jasmine saw in his eyes. Not rage, not regret, emptiness. Inside the house, Jasmine stood alone in the room they'd tried to breach. She looked around slowly, papers still on the desk, the window still cracked slightly from earlier. Nothing broken, nothing touched. She sat, took a breath, and began typing her statement for the morning press release. Last night, my life was threatened not by strangers, but by men once trusted to uphold the law. They came not for revenge, but to silence the truth. They failed, because justice is louder than fear, and I will not be moved. The lights had faded. The sirens had gone silent, but the consequences of that night echoed louder than ever. Jasmine Crockett had survived the attempt on her life, and now it was time for the justice system to speak for itself. The trial of Thomas Granger began 6 weeks after the attempted assassination. From the moment jury selection opened, the courthouse was a fortress. Armed guards at every entrance, cameras on every corner. This wasn't just a criminal case. It was a national moment. Protesters gathered outside holding signs that read, "Justice for Jasmine" and "No more rogue badges." Reporters camped out for hours to grab the first headline. The world wasn't just watching, it was waiting. What would the system do when one of its own turned predator? Granger entered the courtroom shackled, thinner, pale but still stone-faced. He refused a plea deal, claimed he was set up. His legal team, funded by anonymous donors, tried to paint him as a patriot gone rogue, a man broken by betrayal. But the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI's surveillance tapes, the digital maps of the intrusion, the forensic analysis of his online communications with extremist cells. Jasmine's home security footage, played frame by frame. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the jury saw it all unfold, not in metaphor, but in hard, irrefutable reality. Jasmine Crockett took the stand on the third day. She did not cry. She did not yell. She spoke with measured calm, recounting every detail, the threats, the break-in, the confrontation. But most importantly, she spoke of the ideology behind the crime, how Granger's hatred wasn't personal, it was systemic, how he had become a symbol of what happens when unchecked authority festers in silence. The courtroom was frozen as she delivered her final words. "He did not just break into my home. He tried to break the foundation of everything I have fought for, but the law stood, and I am still standing." On the seventh day, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, armed intrusion, aggravated assault on a federal officer, and coordination of disinformation campaigns with the intent to incite violence. Granger stood still as the verdict was read, but the air shifted. The weight of accountability settled over him like stone. There was no applause, no gasps, just an overwhelming sense of justice fulfilled. The sentencing was swift. 15 years in federal prison, no parole, maximum security. But the courtroom was not the end. Granger's fall became a case study almost overnight. In Geneva, his actions were discussed at a UN Human Rights Council summit on racial profiling and institutional extremism. In Stockholm, his trial was cited in a keynote speech on law enforcement reform in democratic nations. At a conference in The Hague, Jasmine's testimony was quoted directly in a panel titled, "When Justice Fights Back." The footage of her confronting her would-be assassin played on screens next to legal experts, activists, and diplomats. What began as one slap in the street had now rippled across borders. Law schools across the country assigned the case as required reading. Departments of Justice and Interior reviewed use of force policies. Panels on cable news began replacing rage with reflection. Where was the system when Granger was radicalized? One anchor asked. How many more like him still wear the uniform? Meanwhile, Jasmine didn't take a victory lap. She returned to work, quietly, intentionally. But she was no longer just a federal advisor. She was now a global voice for reform. Her policy brief on digital disinformation policing was adopted into legislation by 2 states within months. She declined interview after interview, saying only, "The story was never about me. It was about who we let hold power and who we ignore when they misuse it." Back in court, Granger sat alone in a beige prison jumpsuit during his final sentencing hearing. He was offered the chance to speak. He stared at the floor. The judge, a veteran federal official, looked at him for a long time before delivering the final remark. "You were sworn to protect. Instead, you became the very threat the law was written to stop. You didn't just betray your badge, you betrayed your country." And with that, the gavel fell. The courtroom gavel had fallen. Granger was gone. The headlines faded. But Jasmine Crockett knew the war wasn't over. Because what almost killed her wasn't one man with a gun. It was a system that taught him to aim it. For 2 weeks after the sentencing, Jasmine disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no tweets, no press appearances. The world speculated. Was she exhausted, afraid, done? She was in the Roosevelt wing of the White House, behind closed doors, writing law. While others shouted in the media, Jasmine did what she had always done. She built quietly and surgically. She met with civil rights lawyers, police reform activists, federal judges, former public defenders, and even families of victims who never got the headlines she did. She listened. She scribbled. She drafted. She rewrote. What emerged wasn't just a bill, it was a reckoning. The Citizens Protection from Abuse of Power Act, 178 pages of hard, raw accountability. The bill proposed a federal public misconduct database to track officers across jurisdictions, mandatory independent civilian review boards in all departments receiving federal funding, a national ban on sealed settlements in brutality cases, whistleblower protections for officers reporting internal corruption, annual transparency reports for law enforcement agencies made public, harsh sentencing enhancements for officers convicted of misconduct involving racial profiling or retaliatory violence, and one line that would make the nation listen: no badge is above the Constitution. When Jasmine emerged from behind those closed doors, the political landscape shifted. On a brisk February morning, she stood on the steps of the Capitol, not in protest, but in presentation. Dressed in dark navy, without a single accessory, she approached the podium with the bill in hand and looked out at the sea of press microphones, flashing cameras, and congressional staffers. I almost died in my own home because a man who once swore to uphold the law believed he could break it without consequence, she began. But this is not just my story. It's the story of thousands of Americans who never got a courtroom, never got a hashtag, never got justice. Justice is not reserved for those who shout the loudest. It belongs to those who endure, those who rise, those who fight with facts, not fists. And I'm not stopping, not today, not ever. The crowd, including lawmakers, stood stunned. The bill hadn't been voted on yet, but the moral bar had just been set. The pushback came fast. Some media called it overreach. Some police unions threatened walkouts. Partisan commentators claimed it would handcuff the protectors. But every time they tried to discredit her, footage resurfaced of the slap, the false arrest, the attempted break-in, the trial, the conviction. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she went on a campaign, not for votes, but for truth. She visited precincts across the country. She sat with sheriffs and community organizers in the same room. She went live from small-town city halls, explaining the bill clause by clause. No filters, no slogans, just substance. This bill doesn't attack police, she told one town hall in Missouri. It protects good ones. It weeds out the ones who smear the badge with blood and silence. The people responded. Petitions gained millions of signatures. Local officials began endorsing the policy publicly. Civil rights groups aligned across party lines. Even unlikely allies, veterans, retired detectives, military families, began voicing their support. Why? Because Jasmine didn't just tell them what she suffered, she showed them how to never let it happen again. Inside the Capitol, momentum was growing. The bill cleared its first committee with bipartisan support. Several senators who had been silent during her crisis now co-sponsored her legislation. A few even admitted on record, "We failed to act before." Jasmine Crockett's bravery makes sure we don't fail again. And as the bill moved to the House floor, Jasmine prepared her final speech. She didn't rehearse it. She lived it. On the day of the vote, the chamber was at capacity. Reporters, visitors, aides, and even members of law enforcement sat in the gallery. Jasmine approached the podium slowly, holding a small black folder. Her voice was clear, steady, unshaken. 5 years ago, I was building cases against hidden corruption. 1 year ago, I was nearly killed by one of its foot soldiers. And today, I ask this chamber not to applaud me, but to listen, not to reward me, but to protect the next person who can't speak up. She opened the folder. Inside were the names of 46 individuals, people of color who had been killed, harassed, falsely imprisoned, or silenced by abuse of authority in the past 5 years. Some were teenagers, some were veterans, one was a school teacher, one was a pregnant woman handcuffed during a traffic stop. These names never made the headlines, but today they make the law. When the vote was called, the room held its breath. The screen lit up, passed, the gallery erupted. But Jasmine didn't smile. She simply nodded once. Because this wasn't victory. It was responsibility. The law had passed. The storm had calmed. Granger's name faded into court records and prison registries. But Jasmine Crockett didn't fade. She rose, not as a celebrity, but as something far more enduring. A symbol. They didn't crown her. They didn't hand her banners or medals or viral hashtags. Instead, they watched. They watched how she walked into hearings without a camera crew, how she answered questions with policy, not pity, how she carried the weight of survival without using it as a brand. And in watching her, people began to see the system differently, or for the first time at all. Young public defenders in St. Louis began opening their morning staff meetings by reading from her congressional address. A community college in Georgia launched a scholarship for aspiring justice reformers in her name. And across social media, stories appeared. Quiet stories of people who once believed they were invisible until they saw her. A single father from Detroit wrote, "She didn't just make me believe again, she made me vote again." A survivor of police violence from New Mexico wrote, "When Jasmine stood up in that courtroom, she stood up for all of us who never made it that far." It wasn't that she had never been afraid. She had. It wasn't that she had never been alone. She had. But Jasmine Crockett taught a nation something it didn't know it had forgotten. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's knowing the risk and moving forward anyway. That justice isn't just about laws. It's about who they serve when no one's watching. That power doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks into the room quietly and never backs down. She returned to the communities that birthed her voice, not as a savior, but as a mirror. She met with high school girls in inner-city Baltimore who asked her, "Do they hear us now?" She knelt next to an elderly woman in Oakland who whispered, "You were right to stay calm, even when they wanted you to break." She never lectured. She listened. She didn't talk about fame. She talked about process, about the courtrooms, the clauses, the commas in legislation that determined who got to live in safety and who didn't. Jasmine didn't ask people to believe in the system. She asked them to make it better, to demand more of it, to understand it, to bend it, reshape it, question it, challenge it, and when needed, break it open and rebuild. Internationally, her name carried new meaning. In Paris, a documentary aired titled "The Woman Who Refused to Flinch." In Cape Town, protest organizers studying legal resistance cited her as a model of institutional navigation under pressure. In Sao Paulo, human rights students began translating her trial transcript, not for drama, but as a lesson plan. She was invited to speak at the UN Human Rights Council, not as a victim, not as a politician, but as a builder of law, someone who had been crushed by the machinery and chose, instead of rage, to pick up a wrench. In private, she carried the scars. The nightmares didn't stop overnight. The images, the headlines, the footage of that slap, the assault, the cameras, they replayed. But each time, she used them, not as fuel for anger, but as a compass, a reminder. Every time she felt the weight of it on her chest, she'd open her notebook, flip past speeches and drafts, and land on one single handwritten line. If not me, then who? Years later, long after the flashbulbs had dimmed, a child would ask her in a classroom visit, "Are you a hero?" Jasmine would smile, pause, and say, "No. I'm a lawyer, a fighter, a woman who got lucky and made the most of it." The real hero is anyone who stands back up after being told they don't matter. The halls of power still whispered. They always would. But now when power saw her walk through those doors, it stood a little straighter, spoke a little more carefully, and remembered. You don't have to shout to be unshakable. You just have to never sit down. As Jasmine Crockett stood victorious, not because she shouted louder than the rest, but because she stood firm, a deeper truth became clear. a truth that stretched far beyond the drama and the headlines. Her story wasn't just one of individual triumph or legal vindication. It was a story of dignity reclaimed, of justice rediscovered, and of a powerful message to those who misuse power. In the wake of all she endured, unjust accusations, physical humiliation, relentless smear campaigns, and even threats against her very life, Jasmine's most significant victory wasn't the legislation she passed or the criminals she brought to justice. Her real triumph lay in the profound human lessons her story had embedded into the collective conscience. Her ordeal was a stark reminder that abuse of power flourishes only when those who suffer in silence believe their voices have no worth. Jasmine's refusal to remain silent in the face of injustice did not just echo through courtrooms. It resonated in homes and hearts across the nation, inspiring people to believe once again in the potency of quiet, resolute courage. Her story challenged society's most entrenched assumptions, that authority always protects, that status quo always favors the just, and that fairness inevitably finds those who deserve it. Jasmine's courage unraveled these myths, showing instead that power, if left unchecked, quickly becomes poison. She revealed that true justice isn't handed down generously by those in authority, but must be demanded, continuously and courageously, by those who suffer injustice. Her very presence in the highest corridors of power became an uncomfortable but necessary mirror, forcing those who wielded influence to confront their complacency, their biases, and their dangerous silence. Jasmine Crockett's experience taught that the cost of unchecked authority isn't merely injustice, it's human dignity itself. Thomas Granger's single impulsive act, a slap meant to humiliate, intimidate, and silence, did not simply end his career, it destroyed his honor, reputation, and any moral authority he believed he possessed. Granger became a cautionary tale, the embodiment of the bitter truth that power without accountability becomes tyranny. The powerful imagery of that slap, replayed countless times online and in the news, serving as a perpetual reminder that abuse is never isolated. It ripples outward, corroding the integrity of entire institutions and ultimately eroding public trust in those sworn to protect it. Jasmine's journey illustrated vividly that injustice is not always violent or overt. It often hides quietly in subtler forms. Dismissive looks, ignored complaints, biased judgments, small daily indignities that collectively rob people of their humanity. But when injustice erupts visibly, as it did on that morning street in Fairfax, it forces society to see the ugliness it has long ignored. Jasmine's calm defiance, her refusal to respond with anger or fear, became a symbol of dignity and strength. It reminded America that integrity is not loud. It doesn't need to shout, scream, or strike back to assert its power. Integrity simply needs to stand firmly, unwaveringly, and truthfully in its own quiet strength. The emotional and psychological resilience Jasmine displayed showed that fighting injustice isn't about matching aggression with aggression. Rather, it involves facing hostility with intelligence, composure, and the unshakable resolve that justice, once claimed, cannot be surrendered. Jasmine's example ignited conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and living rooms across the country, teaching a critical lesson. Those who endure injustice don't need permission to speak. Their existence, their courage, and their silent, steady resolve demand acknowledgement. Her battle reshaped how the nation viewed those who suffer injustice, not as passive victims, but as quiet warriors whose steadfast courage can redefine an entire society. Her journey also exposed uncomfortable truths about racial injustice and gendered violence within the structures meant to protect. By standing tall after being publicly shamed and assaulted, Jasmine offered a powerful rebuttal to a narrative that has silenced women, especially women of color, for generations. She didn't just reclaim her dignity, she elevated the dignity of countless others who identified with her struggle. Young women across the nation watched Jasmine's battle and found strength in her quiet, undeniable courage. They saw clearly that their voices mattered, that they had value, and that justice was not a privilege to be begged for, but a fundamental right to be asserted and defended. Jasmine Crockett's story made clear that standing against injustice is often lonely and costly. Yet it also illuminated a beautiful paradox, that the loneliest, quietest battles often resonate loudest and furthest. Her ordeal transformed into a rallying cry, inspiring millions who had long felt invisible, unheard, or powerless. They recognized in Jasmine a profound truth, that silence only empowers the oppressor, while courage, even when quiet and steady, has the power to shake the foundations of injustice. Her resilience helped rewrite the narrative, showing clearly that real power lies not in violence or aggression, but in quiet defiance and moral clarity. Her story became a powerful example of the moral responsibility each person carries, not just to resist oppression, but to dismantle it. Jasmine Crockett proved that injustice thrives only when good people look away. Her courage forced America to look directly at its own failings, to confront the gaps between the ideals it proclaimed and the realities it allowed. By refusing to bend, by standing firm in the face of systemic cruelty and personal danger, Jasmine taught a vital lesson, that integrity and resilience, not brute force or intimidation, are the true engines of change. Ultimately, Jasmine's ordeal and triumph reminded everyone watching that humanity's greatest strength comes from vulnerability turned into courage. Her suffering revealed the stark and painful realities faced by many, yet her refusal to surrender illuminated humanity's profound capacity for resilience, compassion, and transformation. Jasmine's fight taught a generation of Americans that while systems may be flawed, the spirit of individuals who stand firm in their truths remains invincible. She became not just a symbol of justice, but a powerful reminder of the quiet strength inherent in those who refuse to be defined by victimhood or silence. As her story spread, its core message took root in the nation's collective consciousness, reshaping how America viewed its own responsibility toward justice. Jasmine Crockett, once a victim of abuse, became a lasting symbol of resistance against injustice, reminding the country of a simple yet profound truth, that every act of dignity in the face of abuse challenges the entire system that allowed it. Her legacy was clear and powerful, a stark reminder that the true price of a single slap, the humiliation and abuse of one person, is never paid only by the victim. It is paid by the very integrity and soul of the society that allows such abuse to occur. Jasmine's quiet courage and unwavering integrity taught America an unforgettable lesson. Women of color, indeed all marginalized voices, do not have to scream to be heard. Their stories, their dignity, and their strength speak volumes when they simply stand firm. Her battle was never about revenge or punishment. It was about reclaiming human dignity from those who believed they could erase it. Jasmine Crockett's story became the definitive reminder that every individual, no matter their background, possesses an innate right to justice, dignity, and respect. In the end, her journey reminded the nation of a critical truth, that true justice is never merely reactive. It must always be proactive, always alert, always listening. Jasmine taught America that the fight against injustice is never truly won. It is ongoing, constant, and demanding. It requires relentless vigilance, quiet courage, and the moral clarity to stand firmly, even in silence, against the forces that seek to oppress, silence, or abuse. As Jasmine Crockett stood quietly, her resolve radiating stronger than ever, America learned a powerful and unforgettable truth, that dignity is louder than shouting, courage stronger than fear, and justice more enduring than hatred. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.